The guards had spent years protecting the castle. That night, they were afraid to enter it. Not because an army had surrounded the walls, not because of an invasion, but because screams had once again echoed through the corridors. The servants lowered their eyes. No one dared ask questions. Inside those stone walls lived one of the most powerful noblewomen in Europe. To the outside world, she was respected, wealthy, highly educated, a devoted mother, a woman trusted with vast estates and thousands of lives. Yet behind locked doors, whispers were spreading across the kingdom of Hungary. Young girls were disappearing. Families searched for daughters who never returned. Some believed they had simply run away. Others feared something far worse. But no one was willing to accuse the woman whose family held enough influence to challenge even kings. For years, the rumors remained exactly that. Rumors. Until one winter, a body appeared that could no longer be hidden. And suddenly, people began asking a terrifying question. What if the monster everyone feared wasn't hiding in the forests, but inside a castle? Centuries later, her name would become one of history's darkest legends. Some would call her the Blood Countess. Others would argue she became the victim of one of history's greatest political conspiracies. The truth lies somewhere between fear, power, and mystery. Her name was Elizabeth Báthory. She was born on August 7, 1560, into one of the most influential aristocratic families in the Kingdom of Hungary. Power surrounded her from the moment she opened her eyes. Her relatives included judges, military commanders, bishops, and princes. The Báthory family controlled enormous wealth and political influence across Eastern Europe. Unlike most women of her era, Elizabeth received an exceptional education. She learned several languages. She studied literature. She understood politics. Visitors often described her as intelligent, composed, and remarkably confident. Nothing about her early life suggested she would become one of history's most controversial figures. Or perhaps, the warning signs were simply overlooked. Some historians claim she grew up witnessing brutal punishments carried out on servants and peasants. Violence wasn't unusual in 16th century Europe. Executions happened publicly. Torture was accepted as part of the justice system. Children born into noble families often saw things that would horrify modern society. Whether those experiences shaped Elizabeth remains impossible to prove. But one thing is certain. She learned early that power often meant never being questioned. At just 15 years old, Elizabeth married Count Ferenc Nadasdy, one of Hungary's greatest military commanders. The wedding wasn't merely a celebration. It was an alliance between two of the most powerful noble families in the kingdom. While her husband spent years fighting the Ottoman Empire on distant battlefields, Elizabeth remained behind. She managed enormous estates, collected taxes, oversaw servants, made legal decisions. In many ways, she exercised authority normally reserved for powerful men. People admired her efficiency, but behind the admiration, stories slowly began to spread. A maid dismissed without explanation. Another servant who vanished overnight. Then another. At first, no one connected the disappearances. After all, who would dare accuse a countess? But someone was quietly watching. And before long, one witness would decide to speak. No one knew exactly what that witness had seen. Perhaps they feared losing their life. Perhaps they feared no one would believe them. Or perhaps they understood something far more dangerous. In Elizabeth Báthory's world, accusing a noble could be far deadlier than staying silent. The disappearances continued. Most of the missing were young servant girls from poor families. They arrived at the castle hoping for work. Many never returned. Parents waited for letters that never came. Neighbors whispered. Priests heard confessions filled with fear. Yet every complaint seemed to disappear long before reaching the royal court. Money had a way of making problems vanish. Power made them invisible. Inside the castle, discipline was said to be ruthless. Historical testimonies collected years later described punishments that shocked even experienced investigators. Servants claimed girls were beaten for tiny mistakes. A misplaced garment, an untidy room, a delayed meal. Sometimes the punishment allegedly lasted for hours. Some witnesses later spoke of needles pushed beneath fingernails. Others described freezing winter nights where victims were forced outside with little clothing. Modern historians continue to debate how much of this testimony reflected reality and how much may have been exaggerated after Elizabeth's arrest. But one fact is beyond dispute. Dozens of witnesses eventually testified against her household. The sheer number of accusations ensured the rumors could no longer be ignored. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's public life remained almost untouched. She handled legal disputes, corresponded with noble families, managed estates spread across Hungary. To her peers, she appeared calm, capable, respected. It was as though two completely different lives existed behind the same castle walls. One visible, one hidden. Then something changed. The victims were no longer only peasant girls. Young women from lower-ranking noble families began arriving at the castle. They came seeking education and noble etiquette. For ambitious families, it was considered an honor, a chance for their daughters to learn proper court manners. Instead, several never returned home. Unlike poor families, noble families possessed influence. When their daughters disappeared, powerful people started asking uncomfortable questions. Those questions reached the ears of King Matthias II. And suddenly, what had once been dismissed as gossip became a matter of national concern. But investigating Elizabeth Báthory was unlike investigating an ordinary criminal. She belonged to one of the kingdom's most influential dynasties. Her late husband had been celebrated as a war hero against the Ottoman Empire. Many leading officials owed political favors to her family. Some even owed them enormous sums of money. Launching an investigation could trigger a political crisis. Doing nothing could become even more dangerous. For years, the king hesitated. Then he chose someone almost impossible to intimidate. Count Georgi Thurzo. He wasn't simply another noble. He was the Palatine of Hungary, the kingdom's highest-ranking official after the king himself. He also knew Elizabeth personally. That made his mission even more delicate. If the accusations proved false, he would destroy the reputation of one of Hungary's greatest families. If they proved true, the scandal would shake Europe. Thurzo didn't rush. He quietly gathered statements. He interviewed priests, doctors, servants, villagers. Each testimony revealed another disturbing piece of the puzzle. Many contradicted one another. Others matched with frightening precision. Certain names appeared again and again. Certain rooms inside the castle were mentioned repeatedly. Certain screams. Too many people claimed to have heard them. Still, none of it was enough. He needed proof that could not be dismissed. Without it, Elizabeth's lawyers would tear the case apart. Then, during the final weeks of 1610, reports reached Thurzo that another young girl had died inside the castle. This time, he decided not to wait. He assembled a group of trusted officials. No public announcement. No warning. No opportunity for evidence to disappear. As snow covered the roads leading toward Szeged Castle, horses pushed through the freezing darkness. Inside the fortress, no one yet realized that history was about to change forever. The massive wooden gates opened without resistance. That alone unsettled Count Georgi Thurzo. If the castle had nothing to hide, why was no one trying to stop them? Torches flickered against the stone walls as armed men spread through the corridors. Servants froze where they stood. Some looked terrified. Others looked relieved. Thurzo ordered every exit sealed. No one was to leave. No one was to destroy evidence. Then the search began. Room after room revealed nothing unusual. Elegant furniture, expensive tapestries, silver candle holders. Everything reflected the wealth of one of Hungary's most powerful families. For a brief moment, it seemed the rumors might collapse. Had they come here chasing stories born from fear and jealousy? Then someone shouted. The sound echoed through the castle. Soldiers rushed toward a chamber deep inside the fortress. What they reportedly found would become one of the most debated discoveries in European criminal history. According to contemporary accounts, one young woman lay dying. Another had already died. Others were allegedly found with severe injuries. Whether every detail recorded later was completely accurate remains disputed by historians. Some descriptions grew more dramatic over the centuries. But even the earliest records convinced investigators that something horrific had taken place. Elizabeth Báthory showed remarkably little emotion. She didn't flee. She didn't beg. She didn't collapse in panic. Instead, witnesses described her as calm, almost annoyed by the sudden intrusion. Perhaps she believed her status would protect her once again. After all, for decades it always had. The castle was immediately secured. Every room was searched. Letters, records, household documents. Nothing was ignored. Meanwhile, investigators arrested several members of Elizabeth's household. Among them were Dorothea Sendis, better known as Dorka, Ilona Jo, Janos Ujeri, often called Fico, and later another servant, Katalin Benecki. Unlike Elizabeth, these servants had no noble blood to shield them. Interrogations began almost immediately. Some confessed, others denied everything. Several confessions were obtained under torture, a common legal practice in 17th century Europe, but one modern historians treat with great caution. That single fact changed everything. Can testimony extracted through torture ever be fully trusted? It remains one of the greatest questions surrounding the case. Yet despite those concerns, investigators believe they were uncovering a pattern that stretched back years. Witnesses estimated dozens of victims. Some claim the number reached into the hundreds. One servant even alleged a handwritten notebook listed the names of more than 600 girls. The notebook has never been found. No verified copy survives today. Many historians believe it may never have existed at all. And yet, the legend only grew larger. As testimony spread across Hungary, stories became increasingly horrifying. Some claimed victims had been burned. Others alleged starvation. Others described brutal beatings that ended in death. Then came the story that would define Elizabeth Báthory forever. The tale that she bathed in the blood of young women to preserve her youth. It is the image most people recognize today. A countess standing inside a crimson bath, believing blood could stop aging. It's unforgettable. It's horrifying. There's just one problem. No contemporary trial record mentions it. Most historians agree the blood-bathing legend appeared decades after Elizabeth's downfall and was likely added by later writers fascinated by horror and folklore. In other words, the world's most famous detail about Elizabeth Báthory may never have happened. But removing that legend doesn't erase the darker reality. Whether the victim count was 30, 80, or far fewer, the accusations were serious enough that the Kingdom of Hungary could no longer ignore them. Now another impossible decision faced the king. If Elizabeth stood in open court, she might expose powerful nobles connected to her family. If she were executed publicly, one of Europe's greatest aristocratic houses would suffer irreversible humiliation. Politics once again entered the story. Justice and power collided, and history would take an extraordinary turn. Rather than face a public execution like her servants, Elizabeth Báthory would receive a punishment unlike almost anyone else. One that ensured she would disappear from the world, without ever truly leaving her castle. For nearly 4 years, the woman once feared across the kingdom never stepped outside again. There was no dramatic public execution, no cheering crowds, no final speech before a scaffold. Instead, stone became her prison. The authorities ordered that Elizabeth Báthory be confined inside a room within Sedge Castle. Builders reportedly sealed the entrance with thick masonry, leaving only a small opening through which food could be passed. Whether every detail of the imprisonment was exactly as later described is still debated, but one fact is certain. She spent the remainder of her life in isolation. No banquets, no political meetings, no grand ceremonies, just silence. It was an astonishing end for a woman who had once controlled vast estates, commanded servants, and belonged to one of Europe's most powerful families. Meanwhile, justice moved swiftly for those accused of helping her. Her servants faced public trials. Unlike Elizabeth, they had no noble status protecting them. Dorota Senes and Ilona Jo were found guilty. Historical records describe brutal executions that reflected the harsh justice of the 17th century. Janos Ujeri met the same fate. Only Katalin Benecki received a lighter punishment after insisting she had witnessed cruelty but had not participated directly. The kingdom had punished the servants. But many wondered, had the true mastermind escaped a public reckoning? Or had politics simply protected one of Hungary's greatest noble families? That question refuses to die even 4 centuries later. On the night of August 20th, 1614, a guard reportedly looked through the small opening in Elizabeth's chamber. She wasn't moving. Another servant was called. Then another. When they entered, they found the once powerful countess lying lifeless. She was 54 years old. Even after death, the controversy continued. Local villagers reportedly objected to burying her inside the nearby church. According to several historical accounts, her body was moved to the Báthory family estate at Ext, although the exact location of her remains has never been conclusively confirmed. And then, history began rewriting itself. Over the next centuries, storytellers transformed Elizabeth Báthory from a disgraced Hungarian noblewoman into something almost supernatural. Books exaggerated the allegations. Plays added terrifying details. Novelists blurred history with fiction. Filmmakers embraced the darkest version of the legend. Eventually, she became known worldwide as the Blood Countess, the woman who supposedly bathed in human blood to remain young. Yet when modern historians carefully examined surviving court documents, letters, and testimonies, they discovered something remarkable. Some accusations were strongly supported by multiple witnesses. Others rested on torture-induced confessions. Some famous stories appeared decades after her death. Others had no contemporary evidence at all. So who was Elizabeth Báthory really? A sadistic serial killer who exploited unimaginable power? A noblewoman guilty of horrific crimes later exaggerated into legend? Or a politically inconvenient aristocrat whose downfall benefited powerful enemies and a king deeply indebted to her family? The answer may never be fully known. Perhaps that's why her story refuses to disappear. Because history rarely divides people into monsters and innocents as neatly as legends do. Sometimes, the truth is buried beneath centuries of fear, politics, rumor, and myth. What remains undeniable is that Elizabeth Báthory became one of history's most infamous women, not only because of the accusations against her, but because her name evolved into a symbol of horror itself. More than 400 years later, visitors still walk the ruins of Szeged Castle searching for answers. Not because they expect to find ghosts, but because they hope history will finally reveal where the legend ends and where the truth begins. If you enjoy uncovering the real stories hidden behind history's darkest legends, subscribe to Her Silent Strength. Every story we tell peels back the myth to reveal the fascinating, unsettling truth that history often leaves behind.